Stop fearing raw meat. Our ancestors have been eating raw meat. There are raw meat dishes in almost every country you can find. There's steak tartare, carpaccio, met, sashimi. We are absolutely adapted to consuming raw meat. And it's just incredible how brainwashed people have become from the modern fear-mongering around raw meat with bacteria and parasites. I'm not someone who doesn't believe in germ theory. I think that there is an incredible amount of evidence for germ theory, but what is missing is the terrain theory aspect. It's not either germ theory or terrain theory. This debate is meaningless. This debate is going too far to each extreme. It's both of them. It's both germ theory and terrain theory. The germ does cause disease, but the terrain theory is what determines whether that germ causes that disease. The issue is that the modern health space focuses way too much on the germ aspect because that is the profitable side. They don't talk about getting enough nutrients, not consuming toxins, getting enough sunlight. These things, in my opinion, matter way more than the germ theory. So when it comes to bacteria and parasites, there's this view that there are both good and bad microbes, but one microbe could be bad in one person, it can cause illness, and the other person, they would have an asymptomatic infection. And people would take this and be like, wait, this goes against Koch's postulate. That means the germ theory is false. No. It just means that the terrain theory matters. But what this means is that there are no good and bad microbes. There are just microbes that tend to be more good and bad. It's a continuum. For example, Salmonella is going to lean more on the pathogenic side rather than the symbiotic side. And that doesn't mean that Salmonella is always going to be on that pathogenic side of the continuum. There are cases where I believe it could shift more towards the beneficial side because Salmonella produces B vitamins that are bioavailable to humans. So if you have an asymptomatic infection of Salmonella, you will be extracting a slight amount of B vitamins from it. And the percent of Salmonella infections that are asymptomatic are almost 70%. So in most cases, it's either asymptomatic or potentially slightly beneficial. And if you need anatomical evidence that we can safely consume meat, just look at our digestive system. It's very similar to hypercarnivorous animals that only eat raw meat. Our stomach pH ranges from 1 to 2, and if you eat more meat, then you'll get that negative feedback loop to increase the acidity of your stomach acid, since a lower pH is better for digesting meat. But a pH of 1 is comparable to vultures that literally scavenge on rotting corpses, and our pH is almost as low as theirs. And the acidity of your stomach acid is the first and most powerful defense against microbes. There are other ones like bile acids, your immune system, your microbiome, and all of those defenses adapt to what you're eating. So if raw meat is exposing you to more pathogens, then you will adapt and have a stronger defense system against those pathogens. There's this view called the Hygiene Hypothesis, which states that the increase in autoimmune issues in people is associated with the decrease in microbial or parasitic exposure from the extremely hygienic conditions in the modern world. And that also ties into what is called Helminth Therapy, where people who have gut autoimmune issues can actually take parasites and reduce their autoimmune symptoms. There are a few different theories of why this happens. One of the theories is that the parasites modulate the immune system so that they do not identify the parasite as an invader and attack it. There's some interesting research in oncology where they use strains of Salmonella and they genetically modify them to become what's called a tryptophan auxotroph, which means it requires tryptophan, and then they inject the Salmonella into the blood of cancer patients. And the Salmonella, since it requires tryptophan, will aggregate in the cancer tissue. And Salmonella has a natural tendency to accumulate in cancer tissue because it will leak nutrients, it's low in oxygen, and it has low immune surveillance. But because they're tryptophan auxotrophs, the Salmonella that doesn't accumulate in the cancer cell will die because the cancer cell is what leaks the tryptophan that they require to stay. Whereas if you just injected regular Salmonella, then you would get a sepsis effect and a systemic inflammatory response that could potentially kill the person. And the theorized effect that this has is the immune system then recognizes the cancer cells because the Salmonella accumulated there. It recognizes the Salmonella and identifies the Salmonella as an invader and attacks that and simultaneously attacks the cancer cell. So the increased immune surveillance from the Salmonella potentially allowed the immune system to identify the cancer cells. Now, injecting yourself with Salmonella and getting Salmonella in the bloodstream are very different than consuming salmonella in food. I don't think it will have the same anti-cancer effects, but it may ever so slightly from the increased immune surveillance. And this is all just speculation, who knows what's really going on, but I think it's interesting that they're doing research on so-called pathogenic microbes in fields like oncology. When it comes to parasites and microbes, the important part is whether or not you have symptoms of infection. The Inuit have a much higher prevalence of trichinella infection, which is a type of helminth, than the American population, but most of them are asymptomatic. Now, everything we've discussed so far assumes that there is a high level of microbial exposure within the meat already. But the interesting thing is, raw meat is sterile until it's extracted from the animal. If you kill a cow and it's not in the process of already dying from a bacterial infection, then the meat itself will be sterile because the immune system does not let microbes into the blood to reach muscle tissue, or else it will die. So upon the harvesting of the meat from an animal, that meat itself, it's sterile. There isn't a high amount of bacterial exposure. The points in which the meat do become exposed and potentially carry pathogens are when it's exposed to the feces or intestinal tract of the animal. So the slaughtering is important, but you see people like the Inuit who eat intestines, and this is also fine. The only time in where exposure to the fecal matter in intestines causes the meat to carry pathogens is in cases where the animal is exposed to antibiotics, vaccines, where they're fed an improper diet. And all of these effects decrease the cow's ability to moderate its microbiome, thus allowing pathogens to thrive. So if you're worried about getting sick from meat, eat a healthy animal. Make sure it's never been given antibiotics, vaccines, and it's grass-fed and finished. And this is why I don't believe Agenus was correct about high meat and microbes. And Agenus really emphasizes exposing yourself to a lot of microbes. But in reality, if you're consuming meat from an animal in nature, the meat won't be exposed to a large quantity of microbes. So sure, you can enjoy your high meat if you'd like. I don't think there's anything too wrong with it. I don't think it's necessarily unsafe, and I just don't think it's particularly necessary. And there could be some issues with the endotoxin load. If you're still worried about raw meat, I would do a few things. I would try to find the healthiest animal possible. If you want, you can slaughter the animal yourself and make sure there's no exposure with the intestines. And before you take your first bite of raw meat, you will go on a cooked carnivore diet, eating 1 to 2 meals a day, and do that for a few months to prime your immune system to be able to fight the microbes optimally once you start consuming raw meat. Anyways, if you come to the end of the video and you're wondering, okay, so raw meat isn't bad, but why should I eat it? Then go watch this video. It explains everything. If it's not up here, then it's linked in the description. And make sure to subscribe and like the video. I'll see you in the next one. But the bacteria and the parasites. Shut up, soy doctor. Send this video to your soy doctor, okay? Because it's gonna debunk that. It's gonna debunk the parasites and bacteria being bad. Okay? Silly soy doctor.